Okay, welcome everyone. The presentation is about to begin. The session will be recorded, so please keep your mic muted during the presentation. If you have a question or comment, enter it in the chat during the presentation, and the presenter will address your question at the end. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after the live event. National Taipei University of Education Center for Research on Bilingual Education is pleased to present this webinar entitled Conversation Analysis and its Relevance to Language Education. Our speaker is Dr. Donald Carroll. We are very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. My name is Jane Chin, and I will be your moderator for today's event. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Donald Carroll.
Thank you very much, Jane. And thanks for all the participants for giving up your Saturday mornings, early Saturday mornings, to join us here. I hope I can offer you something interesting in exchange. Okay. I see everybody has got their cameras off. That's okay. Can everybody turn their camera on for a moment so I can see people raising their hands? Okay, I just kind of get some sort of feedback response going on here. Okay. I see some people there. So I'm curious, you can raise your hand if you've heard anything about conversation analysis in the past.
Virtual hand or real hand?
Either hand. Okay. So I'm getting some responses there, so that's good. Okay. What I'll be doing here is I'll sort of be jumping in and out of the presentation I've prepared. We'll present a little bit, and then I'll kind of come back and we'll talk a little bit and back into the presentation. So we'll kind of jump back and forth. Okay. Again, it's good that some of you have heard a little bit about conversation analysis. Sometimes I'll ask people, what do you know about conversation analysis? And they'll say something like, well, that's turn taking, right? And that will be the extent of what they've heard about it. Or conversation analysis being kind of just another name for discourse analysis. And in some ways it is. Okay. I suppose the best thing to do right now, we're going to jump in to the presentation and I'll get started. A limitation of Google Meet is once I'm in presentation mode, I can't see any of you. And that's unfortunate, but we'll just have to work with that. I'll kind of imagine that you're all there in the background. Okay, I'm going to try to go into the presentation mode and see how this is working. Okay, is everybody seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to get started in that then. So, as you know, this is a sequence of webinars, May 7th, May 14th, May 21st, and May 28th. I hope. Hope we
Excuse me,
can have you all there.
excuse me, Don. Can you move your this little you are sharing your entire screen when
Right, move that down to the bottom
down
there.
to the bottom? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. So, conversation analysis and its relevance to language education. I'm coming to you live from Shikoku Gakuen University in Japan. Uh, so, I'm very happy to be presenting to this group, perhaps primarily from Taiwan. Okay. Okay, so we'll start with an introduction to conversation analysis. What is CA? So, conversation analysis, CA.
因为我要研习了，你不要再耍废了。
I'm sorry. Are
Can
are
you?
you are you seeing the slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Somebody just muted their microphone.
Okay. So, what CA is? So, I like to start with this: what it is and what it isn't. It is a fundamentally different way of looking at and explicating human interaction. It is robust and I'll also say rigorous. I mean, it takes some effort. Research methodology that looks more deeply at the fine-grained details of life than any other perspective. It is also an extensive body of empirical research, now well into its sixth decade, into the observable micro practices of talk and interaction. Now, perhaps I can stress here micro practices. CA really is looking at the very, very fine grained details of how humans interact with each other. And these last two, perhaps particularly relevant to us as language teachers, a window out onto an entirely different view on the nature of language and therefore how language might be taught. Certainly, my experience with CA has transformed my view of what it means to be a language teacher. And finally, it is the relevant body of knowledge on which the teaching of spoken interaction should be based. So most of us at some point have had to teach conversation. But we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean to teach conversation? How is conversation organized? And this is what CA has provided insights into. Now, what CA isn't. It isn't a set of rules for having a good conversation or rules for how to speak politely. It's not rules at all. I think that's kind of a first problem. We do often talk about rules, these rules, those rules, but rather these are better described as observed practices. If we look at naturally recorded conversation, these are simply what people do. It isn't another name for discourse analysis, although the two research fields paradigms share many common goals. It isn't just recording some talk, then writing it down, which is to say, it's not reducible to a simple series of mechanical or technological steps. I like to stress that because often the very first question somebody will ask about doing CA, they'll say, what software do you use? Well, me personally, I just use Word and a sound editing program. I don't use any kind of fancy transcription devices at all. It's really up to the individual analyst how they choose to work. And finally, CA isn't a language teaching methodology akin to, say, the communicative approach. So the idea is I'm going to teach using CA is really a kind of non-starter. But it provides a certain insight to us. If we understand a CA perspective of what language is, that will inform how we end up teaching. Okay, next thing needs to be cleared up here is what sort of CA we'll be looking at. We can say that there are different flavors of CA. There is a lot that has been simply called the analysis of conversational data, ACD. And there are a lot of people in a lot of different paradigms working with conversational data. In particular, though, we're going to be looking at a real mouthful here, what is called ethnomethodological CA, or in short, SSJ-CA. The SSJ stands for Sachs, Shegloff, and Jefferson, who were three of the founders in the field. So everything I'll be talking to you about today will be coming from the ethnomethodological CA, which I think has gained prominence as the preferred way of doing CA. People in other fields have started to adopt the methodology, if not the philosophy, of SSJ CA. Now, I know that kind of seems rather obscure at the moment, but for a moment, if you can think of perhaps your own field of bilingual education and English medium instruction and content language integrated learning, how there are different ways of organizing that. Some people might put CLIL as the umbrella term and the other things within that. Somebody else might put the EMI at the top and all the others as under that umbrella. So in a broad sense, I would say discourse analysis is perhaps that broadest term. Although discourse analysis also has become its own specific research tradition, which in some ways stands in opposition to the research paradigm of SSJ, conversation analysis. So I think the main point here is to say there are different flavors of analyzing conversational data, and they're not all the same. And I think once you get into this, it becomes important to pick the one flavor of CA that you want to do and stick with it. Okay, so the most fundamental thing I can say here is that CA perspective is that language is social interaction, or rather, social interaction is language. They are inseparable. We cannot talk about language and versus social interaction or social interaction versus language. They are in some ways one and the same. Okay, now next couple of slides here suggest this change in the view of, in this slide we have in the red dot in the center, the traditional view of language. This is what most language teachers spend their entire career focusing on. They say, what do you do in your language classroom? I teach language. I teach the system of language. I teach word order. I teach the verb tenses. I teach the pronouns. I teach the vocabulary. It is what every English as a foreign language textbook in the world, in fact, virtually all language textbooks of any language, focus on. This is, from a CA perspective, a very narrow range of things. And outside of this traditional view on language, you have things like language use. So there's that contrast between language and language use. You often hear this in the field of pragmatics. Uh, pragmatics is, again, pragmatics really comes from linguistics and is this idea that there is the language system and then there is how the language is used. So you have the opposition of language on one side and language use on the other. So often the idea that we will teach our learners the language, and then later in it more advanced stages, we will teach them the use of language. CA makes no distinction like that. There is no distinction between language and language use. Language is language use. Another term that was popular in Chomskyan era was performance. So Noam Chomsky liked to talk about competence and performance. Performance was how people actually did use language. And from Chomsky's perspective, performance was actually of little interest. He felt it was too chaotic to be worth studying. For him, it was competence that was of importance. Going back even further, De Saussure used the word parole. We had langue and parole. Langue was language, this traditional view of language, and parole, the French word for speaking, parole was what people were doing when they actually spoke the language. Okay, so this is our most traditional picture of what language is. Language is a system. That system exists in the human brain. It is our job as language teachers to teach this system. Okay, as I said, this is quite different from a CA perspective. This is more towards the CA perspective. Talk in interaction. You'll hear this phrase a lot. Talk in interaction is a word that CA people like to use instead of conversation. When you go to a bank, you often don't think of yourself as having a conversation with the tellers, but you are having talk in interaction. When you go to the post office, when you do the events of your life, you use language. And so for all of these things, we like to simply call that talk in interaction. Conversation has a negative sense, like people say, yeah, I had a little conversation yesterday, or I had a little chit chat, a little casual conversation. If anything, conversation analysts may talk of mundane conversation as the everyday thing. Now, here's a way to look at it. You have all kinds of interaction in your life, but probably the most common form of human interaction that you have on a daily basis is through talk. So talk and interaction. So in this perspective, we now have those linguistic resources for interaction, and they are important. Learners have to have the vocabulary to communicate. They need grammar. They need all the basic resources that we think of for language. But there's now no clear separation between those resources and the broader activities of socio-interactive language. But we can go even further than this, and we come to this. This is a more recent CA picture of things that we have not just language, but we have all of these other things. So I hope everybody's seeing the same screens I am.
Yes.
Okay, so we have, of course, the linguistic resources there. They happen to be in the middle, but in some sense, they are no more important than any of these other things. Let me talk briefly about some of these. Up in the corner there is gesture, which we traditionally think of as things we do with our hands. But from a CA perspective, it's anything you do with your body. So, for example, you may be pointing with a shoulder. You may be tilting your head. You may be looking up at the ceiling. From a CA perspective, all of those things would be gesture. In fact, a more popular term is embodiment. So the embodiment of action, the embodied interaction. And when you get down to it, most of the interaction we have is co-present interaction. That is, you are physically with somebody. And in those situations where you are physically with them, what they are doing with their body simply cannot be separated from what you are doing with your body. Gaze is obviously important. So simply looking, are you looking directly at the other person? Are you looking kind of over their shoulder? Are you looking up towards the ceiling, down towards the floor? The next one around there is activity systems. So many activities are actually structured in very clear ways. Think of if you call online to order a pizza, well, that in itself has its own activity system designed in. Usually the person on the other end taking your order actually has a computer screen and they are entering your information as you say it. And you have to follow that activity system to effectively order your pizza. Same would be true if you were making an emergency telephone call. Those 911 calls are structured in certain ways. This is the information they expect to have first. This is the information they expect to have second and third, and so on. And if you try to jump around through that, you will actually have problems doing the activity. Here in Japan, udon noodles is popular. You go to the udon shop and you get your noodles, but the udon shop itself has its own activity system. And again, you have to kind of fit in with that. So your language use, your interaction is all integrated with the activity that is being undertaken. Then going to the top there, we have structure in the environment. Okay, so every place we are, there are elements that are physically part of that environment. It may be a window. Some of you may have a window here. I have the walls in front of me. I have lights. Obviously, I have my computer screen. And which of those elements are important varies. It's a weird perspective to say, from a CA perspective, items may not necessarily exist. They only exist if they are relevant to the participants in that interaction. Okay, so there happens to be a telephone on my desk, but that telephone is not relevant to what we're doing. So in some sense, it doesn't exist for us. And things can come in and out of relevance. So if somebody were to mention the telephone, well, suddenly the telephone becomes a relevant item in the environment. So even the structure in the environment is interactive and dynamically changing. Then the next one there is body orientation. This is somewhat related to gaze and gesture, but simply, how are you turning? Is your body rotated this way? Is it bent down? How are you standing? This was encompassed the ideas of proxemics. How close are you to the other parties in the interaction? Are you standing shoulder to shoulder? Have you turned temporarily to somebody, or have you rotated your whole body? Okay, and then the last one, I've kept it for last, is sequential organization. This has been a major field of research within conversation analysis. How is conversation organized sequentially? That's perhaps one of the most fundamental things we can say about talk is it is organized in time, and one thing occurs temporarily after another thing. So we can become interested in the sequences that we find in talk in interaction. Okay, now what I have on this screen are some of the most active areas of research for CA, the domains of interactional organization. I don't want to say this is all there is, but this represents much of what the research has been looking at. The first up there is turn taking. How do participants take turns in conversation? The second area there is turn construction. How are turns at talk structured, produced, and perceived? Sequence organization. How are single turns at talk organized into sequences of turns? Preference organization. There's a phrase that most people will never have heard of. How do participants in talk interaction manage social challenges? So what's a social challenge? A social challenge is, for example, rejecting an invitation or refusing an offer or disagreeing with an opinion. The next large area is practices of repair. How are threats to intersubjectivity handled in interaction? Ooh, there's another big word. Intersubjectivity. This is mutual understanding. That is, I understand you, you understand me, not just in terms of the language, but are we on the same page in our interaction? And there are numerous organized ways that we organize repair, and we deal with repairing these gaps in understanding. And then a more recent area has been action formation. How do conversational actions come to be recognized? Okay, now here's an example of what CA might look like. CA has examined real-world situated interaction at a resolution previously unimaginable. And I think this has been a real strength of CA, is to say that we're looking at interaction at a finer level of detail than any other field. So in this case, these are 3 frame grabs from a video that actually come from my dissertation. And we have a lot of very, very fine detail here. So in the frame grab in the background in the upper left, we have A, which is the woman with the red jacket saying, child is. This is a very common thing for Japanese speakers of English. They might say something like, Watto izu zatto singu. Watto izu zatto singu. This is often thought of as a pronunciation issue. But I was hearing it, So I put it into my transcripts. So wato izu, and then there was a 0.46 tenths of a second pause. Now, for all practical purposes, those hundredths of a second don't matter, but conversation does time all silences in a conversation. So we can do that with software, or you can simply do it counting. Here's a quick and easy way to do this. If you say 1 Mississippi is exactly 1 second long. And I could count to 10 seconds by going 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi, 9 Mississippi, 10 Mississippi. That is 10 seconds. But even beyond that, I can say, for example, 1 Mississippi can be broken down into 5 sections. 1 Mississippi. And each one of those sections is 2/10 of a second. So 1, 2/10. 1 miss, 4/10. 1 misses, 6/10, and so on. Okay, other things we can see here is silences. We can see things like etone, which is a Japanese version of we have the loudness of the voice. We have the arrows indicating embodiment. So there's a lot of detail, and we'll kind of come back to that at some later stage. But I think I can say that other approaches to CA, other approaches to looking at conversational data, don't go into this level of detail. And that is a strength of SSJ CA. Okay, Sachs early on had made this observation: from close looking at the world, we can find things that we could not by imagination assert were there. And I think the key part of that, we could not by imagination. There are many approaches to doing discourse analysis that use imaginary data. That is, the analyst sits in his office and imagines conversations and then uses that as data. Chomsky's whole approach to linguistics was based on imagined example sentences, which were then subjected to analysis. Sachs's perspective on that is that we can't know what's there unless we actually go and look at real interaction. Okay, also to give a flavor of what CA is like, here's a sample of an actual CA transcription. This is very confusing. For anybody looking for the first time at this sort of thing, you can say, how do I even begin with that? But it gives you some sense of what a CA transcription is looked like and what the sorts of details that CA analysts are interested in. So, for example, the brackets indicate overlapping talk. All talk has overlaps. If you ever see a transcript that has no overlaps, then you say it's missing something. All interaction has silences. If you ever see a transcript that has no silences, you know something is missing. You see all the colons here. The colons indicate stretching. So not just what, but what? I'm so tired. We say things like in line 13, there's the HH in there in ball. These are infixed laughed tokens. So it's not ball, but ball, ball. That is, the person was laughing as they were saying the word ball. Now, were they doing that because they thought ball was funny? Not really. Again, there's been quite a lot of CA research on laughter and how it is used as a social tool. So, again, this is the sort of transcript that we're typically working with when we do CA. Okay, all of that, we've gone through 36 minutes now. All of that is the basic introduction to what SSJCA is about. And for the rest of today, we're going to be looking at the basics. Now, let me talk about the rest of the today. We're basically going to go until 10:50, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11, and we'll go to 11:50, and then we'll do it. Well, sorry, I'm using my Japan times here, but basically, we'll do 50 minutes, then we'll have a 10-minute break, 50 minutes, then a 10-minute break. So for you in Taiwan, we'll have a break in about 20 minutes. Okay, so we're going to start here with the basics. And the most basic point we can start with is turn taking in talk in interaction. Okay, and for here, I'm going to stop sharing a moment. I'm going to come back to everybody here. And what I'd like you to do, if you can turn on your mics, and I would like you to volunteer some ideas for how you think turn taking works in conversation. I'm eager to have your ideas. So how does turn taking work in conversation?
How does turn taking work in conversation?
Yeah, so people take turns.
Mm-hmm.
How do they organize that turn taking?
Like once you stop asking, I'll answer it.
Okay.
That's sort of taking, right?
Okay. That, but by the way, it's a very common perception of how turn taking works. Like you talk, and when you stop, I talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I interrupt you because I disagree or something, or if I get excited, I'll just take over your talk. That would be.
Now, by the way, there's another interesting idea, interruption. What counts as interruption? Now, an interesting thing there in CA, we often talk about overlap instead of interruption. Because, for example, if you are disagreeing with me, I might feel that you have interrupted me. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you have jumped in to support me or to coattail my story, mm-hmm. I may feel that you are supporting me. Mm-hmm. And no longer perceive it as interruption. It's like teamwork. Yeah. Great. Okay. Now, in particular, we can ask, what about interaction where there are more than two people? We often think of two people. It's like, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. But what if there are three people? How do three people take turns?
Well, it could be two people talking and then the other person listen, and then.
Okay, now there's again an interesting idea to say, everybody, you could say, who is a party to a conversation?
Yeah.
if two people are talking and there's another person that's clearly there, that person is a party, and it's a three-party conversation. Now, it's perhaps different if there's two people are talking and there's somebody over here, over eavesdropping, kind of overhearing. They are, in that sense, not a ratified participant to that interaction. But again, let's say you're sitting together at a table and there are 3 or 4 people. How do you decide who speaks next? Okay.
Sorry, because you asked us question, can I answer the question?
Of course.
Sure, by all means. So this is Winnie.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I think you should be very smart and attentive, pay your attention on other people's talking, then you will know when you can interrupt or you can take something, say something about your opinion, because you don't want to be rude to, disrupt other people's talking. So you just pay your attention, the topic, and later when you find a chance, you can express your opinion, then you can start to talk. Yeah, I think
that's very important. The idea of like knowing when you can talk and paying attention, because if we realize that people's talk unfolds over time, it's not a finished, complete turn that's presented, but rather you hear it incrementally, and you're listening for a point at which you can jump in to the conversation. Something I like to do with my students when I'm teaching this idea, I bring a jump rope to class, kind of big, long jump rope where you have 2 people and they're spinning it around, and I have the students jump in. Well, there's only one point at which you can jump in that is unproblematic. And at every other point, there's a potential problem. So yeah, that's a great observation. What can we add to that? Somebody else? So we're getting some good ideas here. So
well, I really like before I think Zheng Weizhen. Okay, could you please go ahead?
Yes, because I'm teaching in the young kids, I just wondering, sometimes we often, as a teacher, we often ask students raise their hand before they talk, but most of the time, I've just figured out a lot of time, actually, when we are teaching, they just suddenly pop up their idea without raising hand. And that is the most important part. I feel it's so I value about those opinion or those talking, but somehow because our class size is so big, we have almost 40 students, so we need to set up the rule for them to raise a hand before they talk. But actually, the most when I ask a question, if they raise a hand, they answer the question. That kind of answer is that most of the time they have a standard answer when they raise a hand. But the value conversation or value some idea is most of the time that happen without raising hand. That's a.
I would have 2 comments on that. One, turn taking is something that we learn as we become members of a community, and young children often haven't fully developed this sense of when to talk and how to fit in. So that's certainly one aspect of it. Although typically by the time students get to be school age, the children get to be school age, they have internalized these sort of turn-taking procedures. However, it's also important to separate casual conversational turn-taking from classroom turn-taking. And there has been a fairly significant amount of research on how turn-taking happens within formal classroom. As you described, typically the teacher asks the questions. Students volunteer by raising their hand, and then the teacher nominates one of those people. Now again, young children don't often do that. They just shout out an answer. I think that's great. I think in that way, what these young children are doing, the energy they have is absolutely fantastic. And as you go through the educational system, we kill more and more of that spontaneous interaction to the point that when they get to the university, they just sit there like robots, unmoving, untalking. So, I mean, there's something really great about child interaction that we don't want to crush.
I know. Yeah, totally agree with you on that. That's so funny.
So my question is, how can we? That's how I'm often think about this. When I start to set up the rule, you only can raise your hand before you talk. But most of the time, I think it's a kind of I step on my foot. It's like, I should not. I have to set up this rule, but the reality, I should not.
Now, but keep in mind then, a classroom is not one homogeneous interactional context, but rather a classroom varies from moment to moment. There are times where the teacher is in front of the class and the teacher must be in charge, but quite often then you break into groups and the groups work independently, and the turn taking within that group is completely different than the large class interaction. So in that sense, we want the children to be interacting naturally in the small group, but they also need to learn the norms of classroom interaction with the teacher. By the way, that varies tremendously from culture to culture. I was teaching a course in the United States called Education Across Cultures. And one of the largest problems with, like in the US, we might have students in a classroom that come from 150 different language backgrounds, cultural backgrounds in one classroom. And they're all coming into that classroom with different expectations about how they are supposed to interact with the class, with the teacher. Okay, but let's put that aside for a moment and say classroom interaction is definitely a special type, a special category of turn taking. Let's come back again to the idea of you and your friends sitting around in a bar, at a restaurant, at a dinner table, simply having conversation. How are you managing that turn taking? Let me give you an example of how it doesn't work. We've all done bowling. We've all gone bowling. And when you do bowling, before you start the game, you decide who's going to be first, second, third, and so on. And then you actually write it down and it's entered into the system so that when you bowl, like that name comes up, then this name. So in that sense, think of it as a kind of circuit. It's like A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, somewhat going around in a circle. Okay, that doesn't work. So very clearly that doesn't work in interaction. You can't simply go around in the circle. So this would be so great if we could actually do little experiments here, but it's difficult with the large groups like this. But so we've got some ideas here that we have to pay attention. There are some sorts of rules. Casual conversation is different than classroom interaction, that we have to attend carefully to what others are saying to participate. In fact, one of Sachs's comments is the most important reason for listening is to know when you can participate. I see somebody raising their hand, Winnie and somebody else. So
yes, I raised. Sorry. Okay, I raise my hand because you talk about the scenarios. Yeah, it's in a non-informal occasion. Yeah, it's informal and casual. So of course, it's not impossible. We take turns. Actually, it just depends on different friend. You want to talk, and you just can talk. Yeah, you don't need to take a turns. It's impossible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everyone take a turns to speak what you want. So I think it just depend on your will. Yeah, it's my opinion. Thank you.
Again, it's something that for years nobody even really bothered to think about. Just like, well, why do we have to explain turn taking at all? And the earliest sort of people looking at this were anthropologists, perhaps back in the 50s. And they tried to come up with an anthropological explanation, like the oldest person in the group speaks first, and then the second oldest, and then the third oldest, or having to do with social status. And certainly that's important. If I look at my department meetings, well, the head of the department spoke first.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any doubt about that. And then the next senior academics
Yeah.
spoke. And it was only kind of the newest guy in the department spoke last.
Yeah.
So there are formal occasions where there is a certain social order to
Yes.
speaking. I assume that's just as true
It's similar in Taiwan.
yeah.
Well.
But again, in some ways, as soon as you leave that formal environment, that form of turn taking disappears. Okay, I see we've come up to our 9:50 your time.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break. And when we come back, I'll introduce the CA perspective on how turn taking happens. Okay.
Okay.
So see you in 10.
In 10.
Okay, I'm gonna turn off my mic. I'm gonna stay in the meeting. I'll just turn off my mic, my camera, and I'll see everybody in 10. See you soon. Okay, hope everybody had a good break. We'll give
Yep.
people a few more seconds to come on back. It looks like most people are from Taiwan today. I think I maybe saw one, possibly of my students from here at Shikoku Gakuen.
Well, because there were like 178 people who signed up for this webinar, and I'm afraid that we might exceed the 300 in attendance, so I didn't post it to TESOL.
So does Google Meet have a limitation of 300 on it?
Yes, ours.
Like
It's
300 is a huge number, but yeah.
It's usually 100, and when I see the numbers of participants who sign up for this, it went up, really fast. So I was afraid we would have more.
So what I'm seeing here is something like 100. Yeah, so like the people on my screen plus 60 others. So yeah, 100, 120 maybe. Okay. Right. I guess let's get going. So our next session then will go from 10 to 10:50 Taiwan time, or 11 to 11:50 Japan time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we were talking about turn taking and how turn taking happens, particularly in casual conversation. So right now we are not talking about how it works in a formal classroom, although we can say we're certainly talking about how turn taking happens when children are talking with each other. Of course, children sometimes talk over each other, and that's something as they develop, they learn perhaps not to do as much. But really what we're talking about here is casual conversation, the kind of conversation that the talk interaction that is most common. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay, and in a moment we'll be back in my PowerPoint. Okay, so we're back on the blue screen, everybody?
Yes, but
so the one that says in any conversation, people take
right,
turns?
right here. Yes, it's ready. Yeah.
Okay, great. So this was our question that we were addressing before the break. How is turn taking organized? And as I said, for many years, people simply said, it's not organized, or it's not worth looking at how it's organized, or they proposed external rules for how it was organized, the anthropologists, for example. Now, the important thing about the CA perspective on turn taking is it's not based on external impositions of rules. So it is not rules for polite turn taking, but rather Sachs, Shegloff, and Jefferson simply recorded conversation, and they looked at how the people in those conversations organized their own talk. So these rules are entirely empirical rules. They're what we find when we look at conversation. And this is not just English conversation, we have looked at conversation from dozens and dozens of languages and cultures, and it seems to be the same. So casual conversation, whether you're speaking in Chinese or Swahili or Russian or Arabic, all seems to follow these same basic organizational patterns. Okay, so first of all, we have to push out of the way so-called pre-allocated turn taking. So in bowling, everybody agrees before the game begins who will bowl first, second, third, and so on. This sort of turn taking is called pre-allocated. For some types of social events, the speaking order is decided in advance or follows a strict set of established rules. Examples would be a graduation ceremony, a formal debate, or courtroom proceedings. Weddings. In a wedding, there's a certain order. At a wedding, this person speaks, then that person speaks, then this person speaks. Also, as we mentioned about the idea of department cultures, in some cultures, in some formal settings, there might also be societal rules for pre-allocation of turns to talk, for example, based on seniority or social rank. Now, I've taken part in discussions as well, where it is somewhat agreed that you will go around the circle with everybody giving their opinion about the topic. And again, that's, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. It's simply an agreement among the participants in that discussion that this is the kind of pre-allocated turn taking that they're going to do. However, this is not the kind of turn taking which we are fundamentally interested in. It's not the kind of turn taking that most interaction has. So what we need now is to look at different sorts of turn-taking systems. So there's also the sort of turn-taking common to classrooms in which the teacher manages who speaks, either by calling on a particular student or allowing students to nominate themselves by raising a hand, after which the teacher selects one of them. However, most talk does not follow a system of pre-allocated turn-taking. This includes most spoken interaction, i.e. talk interaction, ranging from casual conversation to the myriad varieties of talk at work, and even in classrooms. Really, if we get down to it, most talk in a classroom is also not pre-allocated. On these occasions, we say that the turn taking is locally managed turn by turn. It is not decided in advance, but how is this accomplished? Again, we come up to that problem. When you're sitting together with your friends having a conversation, how do you take turns? Okay. Now, one of the early proposals, and actually still a quite common proposal, is what is called the signal model. In some types of communication, a signal is used to mark the end of a speaking turn. This is the case with walkie-talkies or CB, that is a citizen band type radios. This is the kind of radio that taxi drivers use as well. Both operate on a push-to-talk basis. So, for example, the conversation might go like this. The operation begins at 0600. Over, affirmative, over, good luck, over and out, releases the button and shuts off. Now, Jane, when you talked about waiting for somebody to finish and then talking, you're basically talking about a signals model.
Oh.
That is, the silence at the end is like saying over. Yeah, it's like talk, 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 over, your turn. Okay, this is without doubt the most commonly perceived system for turn taking. So one proposal for a system of conversational turn-taking is the so-called signals model, in which the ends of speaking turns are marked via various linguistic features, including silence. According to this model, other participants wait for these signals, which indicate that the current speaker is going to yield the floor to another participant. This expression, yield the floor, is very popular. And anytime you see that phrase, yield the floor, this is referring back to the Duncan and Fisk signal model. So again, the idea is I have the right to speak. And only when I yield it, only when I give it to you, can you speak. Again, think of the taxis, pressing the buttons to speak, releasing the buttons so the other person can speak. This would be yielding the floor. However, we don't really do that in conversation. So we need something else. So now we're looking at CA and the SSJ system for turn taking. A different description of conversational turn taking, which more closely matches observations of recorded naturally occurring interaction, was laid out by Harvey Sachs, Emanuel Shageloff, and Gail Jefferson, 1974, in their now classic CA paper, A Simplest Systematic for the Organization of Turn-Taking or Conversation. If you're looking for a beginning paper to read in CA, this is the one. It's actually much more than simply turn-taking, but it gives a good account of that. The SSJ turn-taking system better accounts for, one, the empirical fact that next speakers are able to begin speaking with little or no gap between turns. That is, no silence between turns. And that does require explanation. If you wait for the other person to respond, or if you wait for the other person to end before you start, there will be a gap. There must be a gap for psycholinguistic reasons, but we often don't see it. There is no gap between turns. How is this possible? The SSJ system explains that. Two, the common occurrence around points of possible transition of natural overlap, that is, two people beginning to speak at the same time. Three, not just how transition happens, but also how a given speaker comes to have rights to the turn. So that's something that the signals model doesn't address at all. Who gets to speak next? Okay, now for that, we need to talk about TRP projection. And TRP is a transition relevance point. You perhaps remember what I talked about with the jump rope. With the jump rope, there's one and only one point that you can unproblematically jump in. So that one point is the transition relevance point or place. So in a given turn, we have one point. We have all these various points in its cycle. There's the beginning, the post-beginning, a pre-completion, a possible completion, and then a point for transition. And then it enters into the next turn, and it cycles around and around. Now, on the graph at the bottom, we have this sense of kind of the psychological or psycholinguistic perspective here. That is, as someone is preparing to come to a possible point of completion, B is already gearing up to talk. And the estimates for that vary, but we're talking about something between 300 and 600 milliseconds of psycholinguistic preparation is needed to begin talking at precisely this moment. Okay, let me go to the next slide here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And let's try an experiment here, a timing experiment. So everybody turn on your mics. Turn on your mics. And I'm going to ask you to clap your hands. So we're going to clap your hands. So we're going to do this. We're going to say 1, 2, 3, clap. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, clap. 1, 2, 3, clap. 1, 2, 3, clap. Okay. Now, by the way, I found this is somewhat a difficult experiment to do online because there's a natural technological lag in the software. But the point is, people have no problem doing this in face-to-face. For example, I'll do 1, 2, 3, and ask my students to hit the desk. Or I'll simply drop an object, and they have to hit the desk at the same time the object hits the desk. You say, we have no problem doing that face-to-face. Okay, let's turn the mics off again. Okay, so the point is we are able to project possible points of completion in the upcoming near future of a speaking turn. Now, obviously, this is something we do without thinking about in our own language. It's something a little more difficult to do in a foreign language. So if I say something like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. A native speaker of English will have no problem projecting when in the future that, yeah, you're right, is going to come to completion. Yeah, you're right, sure. Yeah, you're right, absolutely. Yeah, you're right, sure. We can do that without any gap whatsoever. Now, it doesn't mean that a learner of a language is going to be able to do the same thing. They don't have those same resources for projection that a proficient speaker has. Okay, let's come back to the presentation. Okay, so what is the SSJ system? So there are resources that we use that the proficient user, I don't want to say native speaker because that's not the relevant category here, but a proficient user of the language. They have the resources of syntax. They have the resources of prosody. They have the resources of pragmatics. They have the resources of gaze and other embodiments. And they have the resources of habitual phrasing. This idea that if we know where somebody is going with certain talk, so their little conversation, well, if you knew my argument, why did you bother to? It's such a common phrasing. It's quite easy to project when that's going to end up. So if you knew my argument, why did you bother to ask? And the person comes in because I'd like to defend my argument. And notice the overlap there actually comes in a moment before the actual end. Why? Well, because A has stretched their pronunciation of ask. B has no idea that they were going to stretch it. So let me reenact that. Well, if you knew my argument, why did you bother to ask? B didn't know that he was going to stretch it. So B came in at the moment they expected the turn to finish. The subtle but important distinction is that in the SSJ system, possible next speakers are projecting possible, not actual completion. Let me talk for a moment about these items here. So syntax, so in short, kind of grammar. If I say in English, let's say he broke. Well, the proficient user does not treat that as a complete item. We would have to say something like, he broke it, to be complete in English. So the proficient user of English would say, he broke is an incomplete thing, and they'd be kind of waiting for that final word. Prosody. Imagine this sentence. Yesterday, I went to work. Final falling intonation. Yesterday, I went to work. Slightly non-falling at the end suggests more talk to come. So yesterday, I went to work, but there was nobody there. Yesterday, I went to work. Yesterday, I went to work, but there was no one there. Pragmatics has to do with the idea of completion of an action. So, for example, what did you do on the weekend? On Saturday, that by itself on Saturday does not complete the request for what did you do. On the other hand, if it was, when did you go to the party? On Saturday. On Saturday, in that case, would complete the action required. Gaze, another embodiment. So quite commonly, when people begin their speaking turn, they look away. And as they finish their turn, they come back and look. So looking at the beginning, looking away, coming back. By the way, you sometimes hear people say things like, Americans maintain eye contact. We don't. That is freaky and weird. If anybody has a conversation with you like this and does never move their eyes away from you, you will feel seriously weirded out by them doing that. We don't do that. Nobody in any culture does that. We tend to speak, move away, come back at completion. So we have all of these resources to help us make, let's say, educated guesses for when the current speaking turn might, and there's the key word, might possibly come to completion. And that possible completion point is when we're looking to jump in. So again, with the jump rope, we are looking at the speed of the jump rope as it's turning to make our projection for when we might reasonably jump in. Okay, now we can get down to the actual rules. And again, I'm very hesitant to use that word rules because this is not externally imposed rules. These are the practices that Sachs, Shageloff, and Jefferson found by looking at their conversational data. And these have been sort of codified over time to become a little bit more rigid, but in that sense, there's still descriptions of what people are doing, not what you are supposed to do. Okay, so what we have is a system that goes rule 1A, 1B, 1C, and 2. 2 simply means go back to rule 1A. So these are sequential rules. So first, rule 1A. If not rule 1A, then rule 1B. If not rule 1B, then rule 1C, If not rule 1C, go back to rule 1A again. So it's a cycle. Okay, so rule 1A, current speaker may, but need not, select next speaker. Now, current speaker and next speaker within their system represent sort of systematic identities. So current speaker is obviously the person who's speaking now. Next speaker is any possible next speaker. So if you have 5 people in the conversation, you have 1 current speaker and you have 4 potential next speakers. So the current speaker may, but need not, select next speaker. So I like to use this when I'm explaining it to students. I like to call this the giving rule. So I am giving the speaking turn to you. So I might, for example, give Jane the turn. So Jane, it is your turn. What do you want to say?
I don't know.
Okay, there we go. So I have given the turn to Jane, and only Jane has the right to speak. If anybody else spoke, you'd say that person is not a ratified speaker because I have given the turn to a specific next speaker. Now, we do that in lots of ways. There's 3 primary ways. Perhaps the most common is that we use gaze. That is, we look at the person that we have selected. Now, in this case, I can't look at you through the computer. So in fact, I use Jane's name. So I use the name, or we might have an address term like teacher, teacher, sensei, sensei. These also are ways to direct a turn at a particular person.
Someone has her hands raised.
Okay, so, okay, let's see. Yeah, go ahead and speak. I'll stay in the presentation. Go ahead and speak.
Perhaps, I don't know.
Can I do that?
Do you have a question?
Oh, no, that person will have to use rule 1B and self-select themselves and speak.
Yeah. If you want to speak, you could, self-select and just unmute and speak. I guess not. I guess it was a mistake.
Okay, we'll come back to that. So again, the idea, I can select somebody with gaze, which is the most common form. We can select with an address term, for example, a name. Now in this case, I said Jane. I put that at the beginning, but I also have the option of putting that name at the end of the turn. So it was like Nani, Jane. And these are, let's say, 2 interesting options that are different. But here's the thing to remember. In casual conversation, we very rarely use names. Most speaking turns are not selected by using names. Okay, so think of it as an additional thing. Now, a perhaps more common form, in addition to gaze, is what is called recipient design. That is, a given turn is designed, the construction of turn itself is designed to select out one and only one speaker. So if I were to say something like, where did you buy that red jacket? That turn selects only the person who's wearing a red jacket. Or if I say, would you like some more coffee? That turn selects only the person or the people who are finished with their coffee. Would you like another piece of cake? Selects only the person that has finished the cake on their plate. So quite often the design of the turn itself selects the recipient. Let me give you an example. I was in an airport bookstore. I had purchased my book, and I had taken my book, and I turned away, walked several steps away, and I heard somebody say out to the store, "Sir, you forgot your receipt." Well, obviously, that was addressed to me, even though I had my back to that person. So sir selects only men in the shop, and you forgot your receipt selects the last person to do a transaction. So without even thinking about it, well, a moment's notice, moment's thought, I turned around because I knew I was the person that had been selected by that turn construction. So all of these are cases of 1A, current speaker may, but need not select next speaker. All of these rules include the but need not. That is, you don't have to. These are all optional rules. Okay, let's move on now to rule 1B. This is actually the one that's more problematic. Actually, it's not problematic at all for children. Children do this without thinking. It's the older students that won't do it. If current speaker does not select next speaker, a next speaker may, but need not, select by speaking first. That is, the first person to speak has the right to the turn. Okay, let's see if I can. Hold on just a second. I'm going to go to the next slide. Let's try it out. I don't know if this is going to work on the internet technology here, but we're going to try out rule 1B, which we can call the self-selection rule. Saxon-Shagelov actually referred to it as the pressure rule, the pressure to take a turn. But in my classes with my students, I often call it the fighting rule. So we're going to try it like this. Please turn on your mics. Okay, and we're going to count from 1. We're going to count from 1 to 50. That is, somebody will say 1, somebody will say 2, somebody will say 3, and so on. Let's see. Again,
1,
I don't know.
3,
4,
5,
6,
7,
8,
9,
10.
Okay, that's good. Now let's go a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
5,
6, 7,
7,
8,
9.
9,
Okay.
9.
Hey, great. Stop.
11.
Stop. Okay. Now, by the way, notice when we started going faster, we were getting overlap at the turn beginning. And this shows that we are actually doing it like we do it in real conversation. Now, to make this a little more natural, I'm going to give us a sentence we can project. So now instead of just the number, I want you, the self-selecting speaker, to say, the next number is 1. The next number is 2. The next number is 3. That gives us the ability to project a little better. Okay, so let's start that. The next number is what?
The next number is 2.
The next number is 3.
The next number is 4.
The next number is 5.
The next number is
The next number is 7.
Next number is 7. The next number
Okay,
is
now,
8.
okay, stop. Okay, that's great. Again, we're getting what sounds like actually very natural turn taking. Notice, by the way, for this to work, You have to be listening to the prior turn to know what's the next number. Okay, let's do the next one here for the number 2, I like, and we're going to make it simple here with food. So I like pizza. I like okonomiyaki. I like sushi. I like any Taiwanese food you want to mention. I like hamburgers. I like chocolate cake. I like crepes, whatever. Okay, the same sort of rule 1B, self-selection. Begin.
I like udon.
I like chocolate.
I like stinky
I like
tofu.
McDonald's.
I like
I like
rendang.
I like
I like
cake.
kimbap.
I like watermelon.
I like dumpling.
I like mango.
Okay,
I like
let's,
apple.
let's push a little harder. Push a little harder. A little faster, turn taking. Continue with I like.
I like chocolate.
I like guava.
I like
Oh, no, by the way, let me stop for a second. Now, notice you don't have to speak fast. You have to start fast. There's a distinction there. It's not, I like chocolate. You don't really have to say it quickly. Say, I like chocolate, but you have to start first. Okay, so let's come back to that again. Like, I like grapes. Go ahead.
I like chocolate.
I
like
like
apple.
stinky tofu.
I like sushi.
I like pineapple.
I like ice cream.
I like cake.
I like kimbap.
I like dim sum.
Okay. Okay, great. Now we are getting some silences there, which simply means we're not quite fighting hard enough, but we are doing rule 1B, the self-selection rule. Okay, let's do one more version of that. Again, I do this with my students when we're practicing this. I actually do it as a warm-up in each class. I want to go to, and then a country. So I want to go to Taiwan.
I want to go to Japan.
I want to go to Cambodia.
I want to go to UK.
I want to go to
Japan.
Ireland.
Okay,
I want
now
to
let
go
me
to
let me
USA.
stop you there. Stop you there. And there's an interesting point about English here. The beginning of the English sentence often is not that important. Like in this case, I wanna. You can easily jump into that. So I want to go to, and then the main substance is at the end. Now in Japanese, that where you're going to go has to go at the beginning of the sentence. You'd have to say Taiwan e ikitai, which is kind of a problem. How about in Chinese? Where does the country go? At the beginning or the end?
The end.
And
Yeah, so it's like English in that sense. You can go ahead and jump in with the I want to go to part without giving too much thought. Now, by the way, if you want to think, you can go, I want to go to Russia. I want to go to Mexico. Okay, so let's get back into that with the I want to go to. Jump into it.
I want to go to Cambodia.
I want to go to Orlando.
I want to go to Northern Ireland.
I want to go to Houston.
I want to
I want
go
to go to
France.
Paris. I want to go to Tokyo.
I want to go to Mountain Alps.
Okay, good. Okay, let's stop there. Go ahead and turn off your mics. So that worked actually quite well. So we got this idea of people jumping into the conversation. This is rule 1B. This is the thing we really have to train learners to do in a classroom, because the classroom environment has taught them not to do this, particularly with adult learners. With obviously young learners, well, this is what they're doing when they jump in and self-select all the time. So we want to kind of balance there. But so this is, if the current speaker does not select the next speaker, then the next option is for a next speaker to self-select. like we're doing here. And in this environment, it is very common to hear overlapping talk. That is, two people self-select at the same time, and then one of them will drop out. And there's even a kind of practice for how you manage who will drop out. Okay, so now we've got our first two rules. Rule 1A, current speaker may but need not select next speaker. Then rule 1B, current speaker, let's say if current speaker does not select next speaker, a next speaker may but need not self-select by speaking first. Notice the little asterisk there. Down below, the comment is that research suggests that participants may also make claims on next speakership via various forms of embodiment. Now, obviously, raising a hand is one kind of obvious thing, but even the idea of kind of leaning forward suggests that perhaps you would like to speak next and people may allow you to do that. Okay, then if it's the case that no next speaker self-selects, then we have rule 1C. If no other participant self-selects, current speaker may, but need not, speak again. This can also be worded as current speaker may, but need not, continue speaking. So let's say something like this. Yesterday, I bought a car. Nobody jumps in at that point. And I say, it's not a new car, it's a used car. Nobody happens to jump in at that point. So again, I continue and say, I bought it from my brother. Nobody jumps in. I got it for a good price. And I've ended up taking 4 turns at talk. And rather importantly, there is a silence between those. It's often no more than a micro pause of 1/10 of a second. But this shows that the idea that it is 1C is relevant. That is, the current speaker does tend to wait to see if a next speaker self-selects. If they don't, they continue. Okay. Now, of course, there's ways that a current speaker may somehow kind of guard the turn by, for example, rushing right into the next turn without giving somebody a chance. And of course, we do that. Okay. Let's talk for a moment about, we said with 1C, we had the idea that it could be worded 2 ways. Current speaker may speak again, or current speaker may continue speaking. So compare those two. Speak again versus continue speaking. Those are not necessarily the same. This next slide suggests how that's different. Current speaker may speak again. So I went shopping yesterday. That is complete. A micro pause. I was looking for some hiking boots. That's complete. There's a micro pause. Some friends are going to Nagano next month. So in that sense, I took 3 turns. I took 3 complete turns. So I was taking 1 complete speaking turn, and then I spoke again to produce another complete speaking turn, and then a 3rd complete speaking turn. However, I might instead continue by adding a piece to my prior turn. So in our second conversation, I went shopping yesterday to look for some hiking boots. To look for some hiking boots is constructed as part of the prior turn. I went shopping yesterday to look for some hiking boots. So I went shopping yesterday. to look for some hiking boots, since some friends are going to Nagano next month. Again, that third turn is constructed as a continuation. So we can contrast those two of speaking again versus continuing to speak. Okay, and then the final rule there is not really a rule, and that is simply we go back to the beginning. Okay, so 1A, 1B, 1C. If none of those happen, we go back to 1A again, and the system keeps cycling around in that order. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and let's come back to the chat. If you want to put in a question into the chat regarding those turn-taking rules, I'll address those. Or actually, if you want to self-select with your mic, that's also great. So self-select in chat or self-select with your mic. I'll respond to any of those questions about those SSJ turn-taking rules. Anybody?
So is there always a dominant like speaker that starts off the first the first turn and then
Well,
comes
first of all,
back to the first
when I do this with classes, there is in fact almost always somebody who takes the lead. And of course, I suppose this is true in any conversation. Some people are simply more dominant personalities than others. Yeah. In the classroom, I often try to make sure they're not following a sequence so that it doesn't turn into dominant person going to least dominant person, because ultimately that's just going A, B, C, A, B, C. I'll try to say, well, you don't want to be the last person each time. Try to change up where you are, and they're like, I want to go to. Don't be the last person to jump in.
That's so difficult, though.
It is, but again, here's the point: it's not at all difficult for people to do in their casual lives. It's only difficult for people to do in the unnatural environment of the classroom because they have been trained not to do it through years of oppressive teaching practices.
True.
Okay, I see somebody's hands raised.
Please go ahead and
So
go
go ahead and speak or type your message, either way.
Okay, I got a question here.
Sure.
I got the audio data only for transcription. Do you without the picture of the students? Do you think the data is valid for transcription using CA analysis?
Oh, tough question. More and more, the answer to that is no.
No.
If it is co-present interaction, you don't know what may, for example, let's say there's a silence in your transcription. Let's say that silence is a second or 2 seconds. You have no idea what may have been happening during that 1 or 2 seconds.
Right.
That informs the interaction. So more and more people are working with video data. That having been said, Shegloff started his work back in the 60s and 70s with just these big reel-to-reel tapes. And there are certainly observations you can make based on audio-only data. But I think most people today, if you present at a conference and you are presenting on face-to-face data and you only have audio, there's a major problem there. By the way, these are some issues that we will address in the fourth session, where we're looking about how to do transcribing, what's the technicalities of doing this. Okay. Anybody have any particular
Oh, can I ask
questions
one more
about this?
question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Is it necessary to stick to a certain transcribe system, like I use in the CA or I use the SS system?
Okay.
Is it
So
necessary?
we would say more and more, what we find is people in many research traditions are coming together and somehow agreeing that the system of transcription used by SSJ conversation analysts is the preferred method. And in particular, it's Gail Jefferson's system that she's described in a 2001 paper, I believe, where she gives all the means of doing this. But again, you have people in many research traditions that are now saying, that seems to be the most effective systems. I've been reading a lot of CLIL papers, a lot of papers on translanguaging, and you see more and more a movement towards including these features of the SSJ transcription system. So I believe it's going to become the norm. And there are good reasons for that. Again, we'll address probably in that fourth session. Okay, we've actually come up to our second break. So when we come back, we're going to move in to the next major area, which is sequence organization. So see you in 10 minutes. Okay, we're about ready to come back for our final session. Okay, our final hour here will go all the way from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock Taiwan time and 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock Japan time. Get in that last 10 minutes.
So you're skipping.
First of all, let me apologize for the fact that some of this, perhaps much of it, has been unavoidably dull for the first session, but some of this is very fundamental stuff that needs to be gotten out of the way before we can get to the more interesting things that we'll be doing in the second, third, and fourth sessions.
No, I'm just very excited that we finally get to learn more about CA and getting started to analyze my own data.
Well, I'm always kind of interested to introduce people to it. There's so much. There are 6 decades of research in this field, and most teachers know absolutely zero about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be a while before that actually makes it into the field. My own feeling is it should be part of for example, every master's program should have a course on CA, because this is just it's just fundamental. I would consider it to be more fundamental than a course on phonology, for example. And yet almost every MA program, MA TESOL program, you've got your course on syntax, you've got a course on phonology. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll have a course that'll be discourse, and within that discourse class, you'll have 1 week on CA. Okay, right. Let's go ahead and get started now. In this case, we're now looking at sequence organization. So again, there was a time where people said, conversation is so disorganized, there is no point in looking for order in it. But one of the earliest observations Sachs made, actually his very first research was looking at calls at a suicide hotline. And one of his first observations was, if you want to get somebody's name, so people who call the suicide hotline often don't want to give their name. And if you ask them for their name, they might just actually hang up. But one of his first observations is, if you tell somebody your name, it is very common for them to tell you their name. So this idea of telling. I always stress to my students, a conversation is not question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. That's an interview. It's not a conversation. Quite often, conversations are tellings and respondings. They say, I live in Japan. I live in Taiwan. That's as often as not what's happening. So in this next section, we'll look at the basics of sequence organization. I'll come back and share my screen. Hold on a second. Okay, So this is our topic, sequence organization, how our turns of talks organized into longer sequences of turns. So one mundanely observable feature of talk and interaction is that prior turns often place limitations on the sorts of turns that might expectably, and there's a key word for us there, expectably occur next. This relationship is broadly referred to as conditional relevance. Let's take a simple example here. If I say hi and somebody screams out pizza, well, that is not a conditionally relevant next thing. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but it means it's surprising and unusual. We expect after a greeting for another greeting to occur. I had a phone conversation with my wife one time where I said hi, and she said, "It's Monday."
What does that
I was
mean?
like, oh, right. And I had to search around for why was that the relevant thing that had to be said in that particular slot. And it turned out, as I thought about that, there was something we had to do on Monday.
So you call that a bad
But the
time?
point is, I could only interpret that based on the expectability that a greeting makes relevant a greeting. So again, these are not rules. It isn't what you have to do, but it is what expectably occurs next. And we use these expectations to interpret behavior. So Harvey Sachs, one of the founders of conversation analysis, coined the term adjacency pairs, AP, in the late 60s for pairs of turns which are regularly found in recorded talks next to each other. The two halves of an adjacency pair referred to as the first pair part and the second pair part. Sachs et al., that's their classic paper, summed up the operation of an adjacency pair as follows. The basic rule of an adjacency pair operation is, given the recognizable production of a first pair part, on its first possible completion, its speaker should stop and a next speaker should start and produce a second pair part of the pair type of which the first is recognizably a member. So again, we expect a greeting to be followed by a greeting. So if I say hi, I'm expecting some kind of greeting in return. Hi, hey, hi, hello, something like that. And we expect it to occur essentially immediately on completion. So adjacency pairs are a normative expectations. There are no hard and fast rules in conversation that participants must follow, only normative expectations. Following a greeting, one can expect a greeting in return. This is such a strong expectation that if no greeting is forthcoming, participants can treat it as officially missing and search for a reading. Was the greeting not heard? Was the person otherwise engaged? Or was this an outright refusal to do a greeting and thus initiate a conversation? What we commonly hear is this kind of thing. Hi, no return, and then we reissue that first pair part. Hi. Hi. Notice, by the way, that the first pair part hi and the second pair part hi are different in their prosody. It's hi, 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 hi. It's not hi, hi, or hi, hi. The first one rises, the second one falls. Even if it's the same word, they are recognizably different. Participants also use the normative expectations of adjacency pair organization to interpret the next turn. A question, that is a request for information, sets up an expectation for an answer. As such, whatever talk that occurs in the slot following a question will be inspected as a possible answer. Thus, an adjacency pair serves as an interpretive frame. How late does the hardware store stay open? Well, you might expect an answer like 9 o'clock, 6:30. But in fact, B says it's Monday. And then A looks at that, inspects it's Monday as a possible answer to the question. So the adjacency pair serves as an interpretive frame. Now going all the way back to Levinson's book on pragmatics, kind of a classic book, 1983. He actually has one chapter on conversation and analysis, and he presents these very basic kind of pairs of terms that we regularly see together. A greeting is followed by a greeting, hi, hi. A question is followed by an answer. What time does the party start? I think around 8. A summons is quite regularly followed by a reply. Excuse me, or excuse me, yes. But also a telephone ringing and hello is a second pair part. That's something we need to stress with students. Hello is not a greeting. If it's ring, 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 hello, that hello is a second pair part reply to the summons of the telephone ringing. Jane, how do you answer a telephone in Chinese? If it's ring, 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 what do you say when you pick
I
up?
don't know.
No, what do you do every day when you pick up a phone? Ring, ring, ring.
I would say hello. I would say hello, but
Say
You
wait.
say hello in English?
I say
English.
wait.
Is there in Chinese? Do we say hello in Chinese? How do we? 吴奇峰老师
Now, by the way,
Say
what
wait.
you say may
Wait,
depend,
yes,
may depend on when and who you're expecting to be calling at a certain time.
Oh,
But let's say you're expecting a Chinese speaker to be on the phone.
mhm.
How are you going to
Normally we
respond?
say wait. Normally we will say wait. Wait.
Joyce, yeah.
Or sometimes
Joyce
just say 你好,你好.
Okay, okay.
曾维珍老师
No, recently we kind of changed wait. Instead of wait, is maybe yeah, 你好.
Really? Interesting.
Really?
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
You pick
Now,
up
these
the
are
phone
very,
and
very
you
interesting
how?
things to say. How do you begin a telephone conversation? Actually, Shegloff's whole PhD dissertation was called The First 5 Seconds. And he only looked at openings of telephone calls. He actually looked at 500 telephone openings to see how they were organized. Now, I've heard that traditionally in Chinese, people said wei wei. So like, I would say wei wei, and the other person would say wei wei. There'd be an exchange of wei wei is kind of like, is this thing working? It's like wei wei, wei wei. In
I think
Japanese,
it's only one
people
way.
might say mochi mochi,
Mochi mochi.
but not so much anymore. Today, the most common one is simply ring, 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 hi, which means yes.
Oh, hi. Not
Yeah.
moshi moshi.
Mochi mochi is what the textbooks teach you.
Oh, yeah.
But if you actually record textbook conversations, or if you actually record people doing conversations, what you actually hear is that hi.
Hi.
Sometimes hi plus a name. So it's like, yes, Tanaka here. Something like that.
Oh,
Okay, but the key point is here is hello. And hello as a telephone ringing thing doesn't even sound like a greeting. You can listen to it. Hello, hello. And in fact, it's not hello. Here's another strange conversation with my wife. I was in the office and we have a kind of intercom type phone that directly connected my on-campus house with my on-campus office. The phone rang And I immediately picked up the phone and I said, hello. Because like 99% of the time that anybody calls on that phone, it's my wife. So I gave her a greeting. But there was a silence. So I said, why is there silence? And it turned out it was not my wife. So as it was somebody from the university, a Japanese speaker. And so that conversation started off like this: ring, ring, ring. Hello. Hello. I actually switched from the greeting to the second pair part reply to summons. And then the conversation continued as it should. Okay, so here we have three adjacency pairs: a greeting, greeting, a question, answer, summons, reply. Now you'll notice that in those, there's only one possible second pair part. There are not two possible second pair parts. After greeting, a greeting is the only expectable next. After a question, an answer is the only expectable next. After a summons, a reply is the only expectable next. However, in these next ones, you have two possible next pair parts. Once again, there's not three or four. There's only two. It's the structure of this social interaction. So after an offer and invitation, you can have acceptance or declination. I tend to call these accept, reject, accept, reject. And I do this thing with students. I say invite, accept, reject. Invite, accept, reject, kind of to get that in their mind. Then we have requests, followed by either a granting of the request or a refusal of the request. Can I borrow your car? Sure. Can I borrow your car? Well, I don't know. And we'll get into those a little later, why they're structured like that. Then we have an assessment, which is, in short, an agreement, an opinion. And after an opinion, you can have an agreement or disagreement. Again, only those two possible things. Isn't he cute? By the way, in this case, they're talking about a dog. Isn't he cute? Oh, he's adorable. This is interesting. Yeah, really interesting. This type of agreement is called upgrade. This is great. Yeah, it's okay. This type of downgrade regularly foreshadows upcoming disagreement. We'll actually talk about those things when we're talking about what is called preference agreement. Here's a point for us EFL teachers, though. Our textbooks teach I agree, and I think so too. I think that's probably true all over the world for all English textbooks everywhere. We teach these I agree, I think so too. However, the empirical facts are both of these things are heard as same assessments, and they regularly prefigure disagreement. That is, what we actually find if we look at real people talking is, I agree, but I think so too, but. So when we are teaching these as the default to students, we are teaching them these possibly prefiguring of disagreement type things. So we should perhaps rethink teaching I agree and I think so too as our default starting positions. Okay, here's a little discussion point where I'm going to have you just maybe consider this, and then you can maybe sort of jump in with some ideas. Let's look at these little this little dialogue here. In the following example, B orients to A's prior turn as an accusation and issues a denial. What made A's turn hearable to B as an accusation? B says, you left the lights on. B says, it wasn't me. Think about that. You left the lights on. It's a statement. It's a statement of facts, one would assume. And in the second discussion, the second mini conversation, again, A orients to A's turn as an accusation, but this time offers an apology. What made A's turn hearable to B as an accusation? It's 6:30. Well, that's just giving the time. Sorry, we had an unexpected meeting. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here. Let's see. I think how's the best way to do that. So let's think of those two things. You left the lights on. It's 6:30. How do those come to be heard as accusations? I'm going to stop sharing, and you can either type an idea into chat or you can go ahead and say something. So I see Jane saying, I do not teach, I agree, or I think so too. But your textbooks don't have, I agree?
No. I was just typing in reminders, do not teach.
Now, of course, you're primarily, most of the people here may be teaching children. And so you're not presenting these fixed language points in the same way a junior high or high school teacher might be doing.
But we do, like at the college level, like for debates. Yeah. I think in the past I have done that.
Yeah, okay. A debate is a formal form of conversation. And as such, I agree, and I think so too, may have a place in that. Okay, let's come back to that phrase. I'll go ahead and type it in. You left the lights on. How can that be heard? How could B be hearing? What is there about the design of that turn that makes it hearable as an accusation?
Because that's a fact. And
because why?
Because it would be stating a fact that the lights were left on. It's like I always say to my husband or my son, you left the air conditioning on in the living room. And it would be an accusation because they forget to, they would have, yeah, they should have turned it.
Okay, so there's something there. Two things, actually. One, the you in that is perhaps relevant, not someone left the lights on, but also what you said, something about expectations. And now think of, anybody else have something you might want to say about that?
I think it depends on the speaker's tone. Like, hey, you leave the light on. So it's not like that.
Now, the way you said it, by the way, you left the lights on. There's a certain aggressive sound to that. And this is exactly why in CA, it's relevant to put in the details of how something is produced. Imagine this. You left the lights on. You left the lights on. Those are two fundamentally different ways of enacting that turn. And the CA transcription should actually reflect that difference. Okay. So yes, I see. So you were expected to turn it off before leaving. So certainly some kind of expectation is involved there. Let's look at that next one. It's, what was that again? It was 6 o'clock. Yeah. It's 6 o'clock. Well, that's just giving the time. Why is that heard as an accusation? And as an accusation is responded to with sorry.
Okay, sorry. I think if, just sometimes happen. If you have kids at home and you hope your kids can, finish their homework before the 6 or before 5 p.m. But when
Okay.
you get home, you find out it's already 6 o'clock, but they haven't, done anything. So you got angry, you accuse them. Yeah.
Okay, again, I have a very important point there having to do with the context and the situation. Nothing has a pure meaning. So a linguist perspective of simply, let's look at it is 6 o'clock. We cannot analyze any turn outside the context in which it was spoken and the expectations surrounding it. So a very important point. It's 6 o'clock in this particular conversation is heard as an accusation. But imagine a wholly different thing. What time is it? It's 6 o'clock. Well, now it's no longer an accusation. So it is the expectations, it's the whole context for when something is said and how it's said that is the interpretation. And here's where we start to get a little point of difference between SSJCA and other approaches to discourse analysis. For example, speech act theory. Some of you may be familiar with speech act theory. Well, in speech act theory, people try to set up what are called felicity conditions for how some given linguistic structure comes to be understood as something. This is external to the interactants themselves, external to the participants. CA is not interested in that. We're not interested in some linguistic explanation of this, but rather how is it that participants themselves in a certain context came to hear something as being this or that. Because the same turn can be multiple different things, can be interpreted in multiple different ways. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. This is a little bit of a slow process for me to do this, but
No problem.
okay, are we back on that blue screen?
Yes, we
Okay,
are.
let's go forward. So after accusation, we have a denial or an apology. And after an apology, we have a possible minimalization. So many of these adjacency pairs seem to be universal in the sense that it's hard to imagine a culture in which a greeting wouldn't make relevant a greeting, or a request wouldn't make relevant either a granting or denying. However, the resources and manner for doing these actions may vary significantly from language to language and culture to culture. So some people might argue, if these things are universal, why do we need to teach them at all? Well, again, how I happen to do a denial in English may not be the same way a denial is done in Chinese or Spanish or Russian. So we need to provide students, learners with the resources for doing these actions in the languages they're learning. Okay, now moving on to something a little more complex. Here, not simply adjacency sequence, not just a first pair part and a second pair part, but here's an analysis of complaints, complaint sequences, where we have a first position, a second position, a third position, and a fourth position. So in the first position, you have somebody who complains. It's like, And complaints can take a lot of different things. So you left the lights on. There's a complaint. In that second complaint, in the second position, they found that 85% made some sort of claim that, well, it's not their fault. Like I wasn't the last person in the room. Somebody was still in there when I left. 5% just said, didn't do it. You left the lights on. No, I didn't. And then 10% have some sort of alternative characterization of the offense. So you left the lights on. Well, it was still a little bit light when I left, or something else. Okay. And in the third position, we have the complainer coming back again and does one of these 5 things. And I won't go through this in detail, but simply, like, for example, number 2, ridicules the defense. Whatever you said for your reason, I dismiss that. I dismiss your defense. I dispute the defense without explicitly rejecting it. In the 4th position, somebody comes back in, the complainee comes back in with something else. So this is more than we can take in right now, but just realize that people doing CA analysis have looked at these larger sequences and found order in them. So complaint sequences may have multiple turns, and those turns are orderly. Okay. Now, in the case of complements start to become a little more complex because we have at least 4 here. Minimalization, denial, acceptance, return compliment. And here's these 4 demonstrated. This is delicious. You're really a great cook. My mother did most of the cooking. You minimize your involvement in the cooking. You haven't denied it, but you've simply pushed it off. I would say, that's a great looking shirt. Yeah, my wife picked it out for me. That is not my qualities that make it. Okay, denials. You're a wonderful cook. No, I'm useless in the kitchen. This happens. It's fairly rare, in fact. Sometimes in Japan, very traditional households, we might get something like this. Your wife is an excellent cook. And the husband responds, no, she's a terrible cook. I don't think that would fly very well in a Western household. Jane, what do you think about the traditional Taiwanese household? So the man compliments the other man's wife and says, your wife is a wonderful cook. And the wife's husband says, no, she's a terrible cook.
Not sure that husband would be in trouble.
I think so too. And again, these are the sort of things that used to be quite common in Japan as simply formulaic ways of responding. I think those are changing. Okay, the next possible response, you're a wonderful cook, thank you. Very short, very simple. It accepts it without elaboration. We often teach this. It's interesting to note, however, that this does terminate the talk. One of the fastest ways you can do to cut off conversation is simply to accept a compliment like this instead of elaborate, like, you're a wonderful cook. Thank you. I really work hard on trying to produce something interesting, or you're a wonderful cook. Thanks. I've been buying a lot of cookbooks, something that adds to it. And then finally, a return compliment. You're a wonderful cook. So are you. So this has been looked at, and it's true that there is cultural variation here. So if we look at, for example, German responses to compliments versus Chinese responses to compliments versus Spanish responses to compliments, English responses, we might have more or less of these different types of responses in different cultures. How do you all feel? What do you think is the most common sort of response to a compliment? And well, of course, there's other things like, for example, age group. Is it young people complimenting each other on appearances, their clothes, or is it, anyway, what do you think?
We'll let the audience speak and, share.
Okay.
Anyone? Professor Wu?
I think that's a quite good question. It depends on the culture. I would say that. Yes.
Well, certainly on the culture and the context. Let's say in a more formal kind of context, a dinner party, not too formal, but let's say a dinner party with colleagues, and you get a compliment. What would you suppose is the most typical sort of response, second pair part to that compliment?
For me, if it depends on which country I stayed. If I stay in Taiwan, I might say, no, I'm not very good at it. But in the United Kingdom, in the Western country, I'll say, thank you.
Okay, I think that's a good point. So I think that also reflects Japanese culture of the denial being much, much more common in Japanese society than the acceptance. Acceptance, on the other hand, probably in the Western context, is more common than the outright denial. I think in the Western context, you probably have a lot of the minimalization as being perhaps the most common. So like, this is a fantastic meal. Oh, it's just something I whipped up in 10 minutes. Minimizing the significance of what you've done. Okay, let's move on from here. So we have these adjacency pairs. Now, adjacency pairs by themselves would make for a rather boring conversation. If all you had was first pair part, second pair part, first pair part, second pair part, it would really be a very uninteresting conversation. But as it turns out, adjacency pairs can be expanded in various ways. In fact, they most typically are expanded. A base adjacency pair can be expanded in 3 locations: pre-expansion, insert expansion, and post-expansion. Each of these expansions is a sequence in its own right, and there could be multiple expansions in each positions. Chegloff, in a 1990 paper, analyzes one single action sequence, in this case, a request and a granting, which extends over 100 lines of transcript, which turns out to be structured around one single adjacency pair, namely a request and its eventual granting. Okay, by the way, if you're interested in a book to get you started off in CA, Chegloff 2007, that's the book you want. At some later point, I'll show a picture of that cover, but Chegloff 2007 is the best introduction that you can possibly have to the nuts and bolts of sequence organization. Sadly, I can only provide a minimal overview here. Okay, so let's first look at pre-expansion. The use of one or more pre-expansion sequences is done to check on the likelihood that a possibly upcoming action will receive a preferred response. If not, the base adjacency pair may not happen at all. So very short, if I want to invite you, before I do that invitation, I might do some pre-expansion work to see whether it's likely that you will accept my invitation. Let's say I want to invite you to go to a beach barbecue. Well, an invitation is always a potentially dangerous social action. So I might start off with something like, are you doing anything Sunday afternoon? And if I get a positive sort of response to that, I might come up with a second one and say something like, do you like yakiniku? Kind of a barbecued meat. And if I get a positive response to that, I might go forward again with something like, oh, well, some friends and I are going to have a barbecue at a beach. And if I get a positive response to that, at that point, I may do the invitation. So the quote in red here from Shagloff, we should appreciate that pre-sequences or pre-expansion are measures undertaken by the speaker or the prospective speaker of the base first pair part to maximize the occurrence of a sequence with a preferred second pair part. So these are strategic moves. In terms of distribution, we empirically find more acceptances, grantings, and agreements. Not because people want to do these actions more frequently, but precisely because considerable interactional work has been done to avoid getting a dispreferred response. Three types of pre-sequences are pre-invitations, pre-requests, and pre-announcements. Let's quickly run through some of this. First, I should point out, it is not pre as in before, but pre as in preliminary to. If you're not getting the right response, no subsequent action may be taken. Okay, let's look at pre-invitations. A little short on time here, so I'm just going to go through the actual examples here. Are you busy on Friday? No, not really. Not at all. No, I'm just washing my hair. No, I'm just tidying up around the house. So this would be a go-ahead. That is, the person hears it, says, I am hearing a possible invitation in the future, and I want it to go forward to that. What are you doing around 8 p.m.? Nothing much. Do you like Irish music? Yeah, I love it. These would be typical kind of go-aheads. Our learners do not hear these things as pre-invitations. They hear them as questions, and they provide an answer. So, are you busy on Friday? Yes, I have classes all day long. Which says, stop. Do not continue with your invitation. What are you doing around 8 p.m.? I'm going to do homework. I'm watching TV. Stop. Do not continue. Do you like Irish music? A little. I prefer pop music. These are stops. So our students tend to respond to these types of things as questions rather than pre-invitations. It's our job to help them understand them, to hear them as pre-invitations. So as opposed to a go-ahead, we can also get a block. Are you busy on Friday? I got some stuff I sort of have to do. Do you like Irish music? Yeah, that's a great word, by the way. Yeah is a yes that says no. Yeah, not so much. Again, it's our job to help students learn how to do go-aheads, learn how to perform blocks, and learn that an answer to any of these questions will be heard as a block by the person doing the pre-invitation. Now, sometimes we get hedges, sort of these in between. What are you doing on Friday? Just doing some odds and ends. Why? Now, this is non-committal. Like, well, it depends on what you're going to do. In which case, we might think of a sort of way around this. Are you busy on Friday? Not particularly. Why? A couple of us are thinking of having a barbecue at the beach. Notice that is not an invitation. It's not phrased as an invitation. It's a telling. If the person responds positively to that telling, then we can come around to the invitation. Are you busy on Friday? Not particularly. Why? A couple of us are thinking of having a barbecue at the beach. That sounds like a lot of fun. We'd love to have you join us. Okay. Pre-offers. That's a little bit less obvious than a pre-invitation. But let's take a look at this one example here, the top one. I'm going to buy a thermometer because I think she's going to say got a temperature, and Les responds with, we have a thermometer. So it's not yet an offer. It's not yet you can borrow ours, which Les does later. This is preparing for the offer. So I'm going to buy a thermometer because I think we have a thermometer. You do. There's the go ahead. Want to use it? Yeah. So we have a thermometer. You do. There's the pre-offer, go ahead. And then there's the offer, want to use it, and the acceptance to the offer, want to use it? Yeah. Okay, the next one is just a block, but I think I'm going to skip that just because we only have about 10 minutes remaining here. Pre-requests. Pre-requests typically are along the lines of, are you free? Do you have? Do you know how to? These sorts of things. Are you free often goes together with a time. So for example, are you free Saturday afternoon? That sounds like it might be a pre-invitation. Are you free at 3 o'clock after class? That sounds a little bit more like a request. Do you have a hammer? Definitely sounds like a pre-request. Do you know how to upgrade the operating system on a computer? Definitely a pre-request. Pre-announcements. Now, this interesting thing, you say, every 5-year-old child knows this first one. Guess what? What? But if you do that with your learners, most of them will have no idea what to say after guess what? Guess what? And they will simply sit there in silence. But this is a guess what? That is, I have news to tell. What says go ahead and tell me your news. So guess what is the pre-announcement. What says continue with your news. Here's some other variations on that. Guess how much I paid for this. How much? Did you hear what happened at work yesterday? No. What? Hey, I got something that's wild. What? That is, it tells you not only that I have news, but I have something that's wild news. So quick summary there. We had the pre-invitations, we had pre-offers, we had pre-requests, we had pre-announcements. Okay, I'll skip that. Is that a question or a pre-announcement? again, this is not up to us as linguists or language teachers to decide. It's up to the participants in the interaction. Down at the bottom here, we have a classic bit of CA data. Mother and her son, Russ. Mother says, "Do you know who's going to that meeting?" Russ responds, "Who?" It is. Russ responds as if this is a pre-announcement. That is, he wants Mother to tell who will be going to the meeting. So, do you know who's going to the meeting? Who? Mother responds with, "I don't know." She is correcting Russ's interpretation in line number 2, pointing out that she did not intend it to be a pre-announcement. She intended her question to be an actual question. And then Russ actually go ahead and actually answers the question. Probably Mrs. McOwen doesn't, probably Mrs. Cadre, and some of the teachers and the counselors. So it turns out Russ actually knows quite in detail who is going to be at the meeting. But here's a case of saying he chooses to respond in line 2 as a pre-announcement. Okay, there are also some other pre-pres, and this may be someplace. So we often hear these things. Could you do me a favor? Sure. Now, what comes next after that? If we do that as, I'll jump back in this screen so that you don't see it. If you ask somebody to do this, in fact, let me do it with Jane. Jane.
Yes.
You start and say, I want you to say, can you do me a favor?
You want me to say, oh, can you do me a favor?
Sure.
I need lunch. Can you get me some lunch?
Okay. So this is what people assume. That is, can you do me a favor? Sure. And then they ask the favor.
Yes, yes.
Well, this is not what we find when we look at these sequences in actual conversation. What we find is fairly elaborate tellings, as we have here. Could you do me a favor? Sure. Well, you know that I've been having problems with my car, like the engine not starting. Well, it happened again this morning, and I've got this really important meeting to get to this afternoon, but the garage guy says the car isn't going to be ready until maybe the day after tomorrow. Notice there's no request in there. So what do you think is happening? You know, it's trying to pull out a volunteering, trying to get the other person to volunteer. Obviously, you're sort of saying, oh, I want you to give me a ride.
Yeah.
But I'm avoiding doing that. And this is exactly what pre-pres do. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Well, and then you launch into something. Quite common if you look at political interviews. The interviewer, again, let's say the reporter says to the politician, can I ask you a question? Sure. And then blah, 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 blah for 5 minutes. They go in. So pre-pres are a way of getting the other person to volunteer to do the action. Can you do me a favor? I want you to volunteer the favor. Can you, could I ask you a question? I want you to volunteer an answer before I ask a question. Okay. Also, pre-pres are sometimes used to mark something as a delicate, like, could I ask you how much you weigh? Well, you know, those are not questions people typically ask, you know. So this is a way that you sort of mark something as delicate. So another use of pre-pres. So called pre-pre because they're a pre-sequence that goes before other pre-sequences. Okay, so this is the kind of thing you might practice with students. Could you do me a favor? Sure. And then an extended telling, and then to get the student to offer some sort of assistance to that. Okay, let's see very quickly. There's still quite a lot to do here. So I think probably best, rather than rush through this, I'm going to stop sharing here. And let's try some of these. Could you do me a favor? And then, so we'll do that. Could you do me a favor? I'll respond with sure, and then you give me that extended telling. Okay, of whatever sort. It could be any kind of favor that you can think of. Okay, so maybe somebody jump in with, could you do me a favor?
Yeah, Professor Wu, you're waving. Go ahead.
Could you do me a favor?
Sure, no problem.
You know, I got a problem this morning. I drove my car to my school, and I left something in my car. Actually, I left my purse in my car. Now,
is it in the parking lot now?
Yes, but it's quite far. I cannot go back. I have a class after 5 minutes.
I'm in the parking lot right now. Is your car unlocked?
Yes, it's locked, but keys
let's see.
here. You know, I got a problem here. I have 5 minutes to go. I have a class, but I'm very hungry now. So it says,
I could pick something up by the cafeteria and bring it to your office.
Yes, thank you very much. That's my papers.
Okay, that's great. A very natural pre-pre. Okay, somebody else want to try one? So well done. So someone else, could you do me a favor? Could you do me a favor?
I don't know if Show Tai's camera is on.
Okay.
I don't know if you would like to try.
Okay, let's do this. We've just got a few more minutes. Let's make this sort of free. Anything you want to ask me about this session, or just any questions at all you have so far. You can type it in a chat, or you can just unmute your mic and say it. Either way. So type it in the chat or afterwards. Any questions or comments?
Well, actually, there's only 3 minutes left, and we have like I have a question that I had in the chat in the very beginning.
Okay, yeah.
But it was quite long because I put here, if we're studying embodiment in CA, wouldn't it be impossible to analyze what's going on in the classroom full of students?
Yeah, well, let's save that for that final session, in the sense that if you got a class of 40 people, how could you possibly do a recording analysis on that? Let's talk about that. I see another comment here to how do we teach this in the classroom? And I think that's a very good point to say, this is where we come back to the idea of saying CA is not a teaching methodology, but it definitely informs what you need to do in the classroom. So once you become sensitized to the things we've looked at so far, the turn taking, the sequence organization, the preference organization, the structure of questionings that we'll look at next session, then you have to ask yourself, what am I doing in the class? Maybe what I think of as being the language teacher is not actually what I need to be doing. Maybe I need to alter fundamentally what happens in the classroom. Maybe I need to stop being the teacher in the front of the classroom. Maybe I need to become the interaction facilitator. Maybe I need to have some more interactive type activities that will cause these things to emerge naturally. Can these things be taught in an objective way? I think some can. Like, for example, how you accept an invitation. Like, do you want to play tennis? Yes, I do. That's a terrible answer. It really is an awful, terrible answer. And no student should ever say that. We should be teaching them, do you want to play tennis? Sure. You want to play tennis? Sure, that sounds great. There's a completely naturally occurring, and that's a very, very teachable point. Some of the other points are more difficult to teach, like what is the meaning of silence? And that's where we need to alter what we're doing in a classroom. Okay.
Okay, and with that, I think we must conclude today's online program. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I mean, 3 hours, this is a tremendously long session, and I appreciate all of your patience for staying with us. I hope it would get a little more exciting each time. Again, we're covering some real basics now, and hopefully it'll kind of move a little faster.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's thank Professor Donald Carroll.
Well, thank you to everybody here.
And please complete, please take the survey and give us some feedback. We'll see you next week. Hopefully this will help you inform.
And by all means, if you want to think about some things, and definitely we'll have more time in subsequent sessions for kind of back and forth exchanges with questions and so.
Thank you. Oh, so
okay.
We have 2 people who raised their hands.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay.
So anybody?
May Chen, do you have a question for no?
Question or comment?
No. No? Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See you.
Professor Chen.
See you next week.
See you.
See ya.
Okay. Bye-bye. Go have lunch.